Hey, welcome back to Ruin Report, the podcast where we dive into major literary works that connect to themes of disaster. I'm Emily.
I'm Chloe.
And I'm Gia.
Today, we're going to be analyzing pages from A Fire Story by Brian Fees and analyzing some of the choices he made. A Fire Story is a graphic memoir about the 2017 Tubbs Fire in California. The author, Brian Fees, is an American cartoonist, and surprisingly, his educational background isn't even related to art. He studied physics and English at the University of California, Davis, and some of his career paths included newspaper reporting, he was an environmental chemist at one point, freelance writing, and a science writer. All these things ended up helping once he started using his passion for cartoons as an actual career. Cartoons were a side thing for him, but he started gaining attention when he posted a story about his mom, and he ended up winning the 2005 Eisner Award, which is basically an Oscar, but for comics. And so his stories are all about things in his personal life, and he uses them as a way to make his readers empathize with the characters in the story and the whole thing in general. But A Fire Story is about the Tubbs Fire that devastated his home and many other areas in California. It started in October 2017, and it was caused by a private electrical system failure. It burned through 8 counties and almost 37,000 acres. So many fires were burning at this point in time that the whole thing as a group became known as the Northern California Firestorm. The economic damage to Santa Rosa, California is estimated to be about $1.3 billion, and it includes the destruction of 5,000 structures. As of 2020, about 2,100 houses had been rebuilt in Sonoma County, and the city of Santa Barbara had received over $90 million from the Pacific Gas and Electric Company.
This book is about Brian Fees and his experiences with the California fires. Brian lived an ordinary life before the fire with his wife and 2 pets. Then, on October 8, 2017, everything changed when a huge fire burned down his neighborhood. Brian Fees and his wife were woken up in the middle of the night to a fire quickly spreading behind their house. The whole situation was chaotic and very quick. They didn't have much time at all to pack their things, so they packed what they thought was necessary. They were under the impression that they were coming back as soon as the threat had passed, although this was not the case. Fees ends up going back the next day and finds that their house was burnt down and they had nowhere to go. In the book, Fees included actual pictures he took the day he went back. The pictures showed what remained of his house and his personal belongings, and it wasn't much. Fees and his wife end up going to live with their daughters. They are forced to start an entirely new life. In the book, Fees also gathered stories from other victims of the fire and retold their stories as well. This whole book sort of described the steps that Fees and his wife had to take to overcome this traumatic event that happened to them. Eventually, Fees seems to come to terms with the new life he was forced to live. These fires happened a while ago, but people in California are still dealing with these events in a new wave of fires. This book provides good insight into how the victims are feeling as they experience this tragedy and the trauma they have to face. The current fires happening in California have affected so many people. The fires have already caused almost 30 deaths in under 3 months. The fires are relentless as they burn down homes and force many evacuations.
Now to switch gears more so to the actual graphic memoir called The Fire Story. Throughout this graphic memoir, Brian Fees uses color changes drastically. In the beginning of the graphic memoir, the general color scheme is deep orange and blue. There's a particular panel early on in the graphic memoir where the sky is a deep blue, and the only thing lighting the sky up is the dark orange of the raging fire. The people are black silhouettes all in their cars, and the roads and cars are blue. The colors of the car and the people being blue shows the sadness and emptiness they are facing as they are desperately trying to evacuate the fires. This panel shows more of the high emotions of uncertainty circulating within the residents of the fires. But on the other hand, as the graphic memoir progresses, the color scheme changes to bright pink and bright yellow. There's a particular panel later in the graphic memoir where the sky is a yellow and orange fire and the ground is pink. Much like how the residents nearby these fires are feeling, they aren't feeling this extreme fearfulness or emptiness anymore. Now they are able to deal with the consequences that the fires left behind. Since this panel is very full of bright color, it symbolizes the heightened emotion that these residents are feeling post-fire, but they are in a more positive manner, as the residents are somewhat accepting the fate of the fire. The blaring blue and orange are gone, and the residents are now faced with this glimpse of hope.
The switch in color scheme is an important aspect in a fire story. The switch in color has to do with Brian Fees' shift in perspective towards the fire. At first, he was fearful of the fire, which can be seen in the blue and the orange. These colors can come off as alarming and aggressive. Then we see a perspective switch when the colors change to pink and yellow, which suggests maybe Brian Fees has started to accept the fire. Pink and yellow are still pretty aggressive, but a lot calmer than a bright blue and a bright orange.
The change in the color scheme doesn't only represent just the emotions of the people experience it and what Brian Fees is feeling, but it can also represent physical changes in the fire. These physical changes in the fire could be, as time goes on, it's dwindling down now. And so the pink and yellow are more if there's only the glowing embers left, really. But this can also be connected to other types of disasters, like how after a major hurricane, there tends to be a very beautiful sunset, and that can be representative. Maybe everything's going to be fine now, and we have time to rebuild everything. So it's more the positive side of the disaster.
Next, to switch gears a little bit, it is commonly debated in the literature community that a fire story being a graphic memoir is detrimental to the author's purpose and the kind of general idea that the author has in mind when he published this. So, what do you guys think?
Personally, Fire Story is a graphic memoir that covers a very serious topic, and because of that, I think that the genre takes away from the seriousness of the topic. I think the images make the memoir a little more childish. When Brian Fees inserted his own physical pictures of his burnt house, I felt that those pages made the story feel a little more real, and I took those pages more serious than any of the other pages. And so I think that this graphic memoir could be more effective if it were in a more traditional format, and this way the topic would be better represented.
That's a good point about taking away some of the seriousness of the topic. But like looking at it from a different way, the author just like getting his story out there, it also kind of widens his audience base, because even though it is a serious topic, in the form of a comic, younger kids might be able to understand it more because of the pictures. But like based on your age, kind of you'll have a different perspective of like how you interpret certain lines. And I kind of want to bring up this one line. I found it alarming like the second time I read it, because at first I kind of just went over it, but then realized what it had said. And so it's at the bottom of page 53. It says, "I later learned that on the very day I was at my most indignant, search and rescue teams were going house to house, checking bed springs for human bones." That's kind of distressing, obviously, for knowing people were killed during these fires. It's kind of casually mentioned, and so if you're reading it at a faster pace, you might just skim over it, but that's a really hard point of like how these fires destroyed so many people's families and everything.
I think that's a really good point, that it does reach a wider audience since it is a graphic memoir, but I don't necessarily feel like reaching a wider audience means that it has the same effect as it could have if it were formatted as a book. The quote that you brought up, the first time I read a fire story, I skipped over because it is so picture focused. I didn't even read it. And I think a lot of readers would relate to that. And I think that is a huge problem when you're writing about a topic as heavy as the California fires. Overall, I think because the emphasis is on pictures and not the words, the graphic memoir is not a more effective way for Brian Fees to tell his story.
Yeah, so overall, I think it is just important to mention that even though this is a debate and people don't think the book is as effective of communicating the author's purpose, it doesn't really diminish the fact that this was a tragic fire and many, many people were affected by this. But even when debating it, it's also just important to keep in mind that this is in fact a true story and it's not just fiction that was produced in a cartoon manner. So yeah, thank you for joining us today on Ruin Report.